Okay then, so without further ado, we'll get started on this webinar. Now, so first of all, I'd just like to say hello to everyone and welcome you to our series of 4 webinars to show you step by step how to take an initial idea through the storyboarding phase and into development in Articulate Storyline 360. First of all, we're going to have a little bit of housekeeping. We've muted everyone's mics. This is just to avoid any feedback from the mics or any disturbances. We have allocated time at the end for questions. If you have any questions at all during the module, just feel free to jot them down in the question box. You'll see it at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. Now, we won't be able to see this question box ourselves when we're presenting. However, we will have them listed in front of us for the end. So just in case you were wondering why we weren't answering straight away, we will be getting to all the questions at the end. So here's a quick overview of what will be happening over the next few webinars. So experienced instructional designers will be sharing their experience to show you how to develop engaging e-learning content. You'll learn expert tips, tricks, and shortcuts as you develop content, and you'll use the content library built into Storyline to help bring your slides to life with different characters, images, illustrations, icons, and videos. So basically, we'll be giving you an overview of each stage, what we as instructional designers go through to produce a module. So the webinars will cover building a welcome screen just to capture your learner's attention. We're going to be looking at learning objectives, which are what you want your learner to achieve. We'll be looking at multiple interactions, including layers for tabbed interactions, interactive images, etc., knowledge checks and quizzes with results screens, and the summary. Okay, so first of all, let me introduce the company, Enovation. So this is who are Enovation. So in a nutshell, we are an e-learning company that has been creating dynamic online learning for almost 20 years, which is not to be sniffed at. We are part of a team of e-learning experts who are skilled in content creation, LMS hosting, design, training, etc. We take care of the whole package. Okay, so now that we've seen who Enovation are, we're going to introduce ourselves. I say we because I'll be co-presenting with my colleague Paddy, but my name is Tara. And I'm an instructional design with Enovation, and I have been for the past couple of years. Before that, I was with Amazon, and in a past life, I was a secondary school teacher. I made the move into e-learning because I see it as being the future of teaching and training.
Hey everyone, my name is Paddy and I'm the other co-presenter today. And I've been an instructional designer and trainer for over a decade, working in educational institutions and in private industry. I love working on e-learning because every project is different and it's very rewarding to see courses come to life. So this series of webinars aims to assist you in creating interactive and engaging e-learning. We will be looking at storyboarding, best practice principles in instructional design, and applying these to your content, creating an eye-catching and interactive module in Storyline, and the assessment of your learner's knowledge to enhance the knowledge transfer from subject matter expert to the student. If you want to learn more at any stage, you can follow up with us at info@enovation.ie. So here's an overview of the different webinars that we have planned over the next few weeks, including an introduction to interactions, getting your timings right, and quizzes, checks, and results. But first, let's begin with our introduction to storyboarding and Articulate Storyline. So this is what we're going to have built by the end of this module. But first things first, it's important to consider the instructional design implications of creating an e-learning module before you attempt to build your content.
Okay, so first of all, we are going to look at the importance of instructional design principles in e-learning. So why are these so important? To start off, let's work our way from the end product, which is what do we want to achieve with an e-learning module? Well, basically, we want our learners to learn, in a nutshell. We want them to be able to take away with them a new skill or a new understanding. So in order to do that, we need to be as engaging and as interactive as possible with our e-learning. Now, there are umpteen advantages to e-learning, but one disadvantage is not having a trainer in the room with the learner. Having a trainer adds personality to a lesson. So this is why, in their absence, it's really important to make an e-learning module that stands out, all the while educating the learner. So you're not going to have engaged learners and engaging with their content if you just dump a PowerPoint in front of them and ask them to click through. I'm sure you all know this. So this is where instructional design principles come into play. So in applying instructional design principles, you will analyze the training needs and materials. I'm sure many of you already do this in either a formal or informal needs gap analysis by looking at where the training might be lacking in certain areas of your company and how it should be addressed. So that would be your first step, obviously, before you get into building any kind of module. Then you'll storyboard the content by rewriting and restructuring the materials as necessary. So this is possibly something that you don't do, and this is what we want to show you today. Creating a storyboard is a huge part of creating e-learning content. The storyboard allows you to design your e-learning slide by slide and gives you the objectivity to include or omit the content you feel is most relevant to the module. It also sets out each stakeholder's role and ensures that everyone is happy with the module before you tackle the build. Then we're going to define our learning objectives. I'm sure many of you already have encountered these before, but for those who haven't, these are targets of learning that the learner should have achieved by the end of the module. Once you've defined these, you'll see that this is the skeleton that you can flesh your learning out on. Then we are going to create interactive and multimedia elements to engage the learner. So this will be covered in one of our following webinars, and it really is one of the essential components of good e-learning. And then finally, create assessments for learning. So these are often knowledge checks that are peppered throughout the module, along with a final and graded assessment that can be fed back into your learning management system or LMS to track the learning depending on the module and the outcomes that you wish to achieve. It also allows learners to make mistakes and learn from them, which is part and parcel of an e-learning module. So that's what we'll basically be covering today, and the importance of instructional design principles. On screen here, you have a diagram of the ADDIE model. Now, just very briefly, I don't want to go into the theory too much, but some of you may have already heard of this, or the ADDIE model of development. It's a development method that most instructional designers would like to follow when they're building a module. It pretty much mirrors what I've just said. So the ADDIE stands for analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So, and it's, as you can see, it's a cycle, and it can follow several iterations before you get the module that both you and your learners and your subject matter experts are happy with. So really, it's you could go through 2-3 cycles of ADDIE before you kind of achieve the end result that you want.
So here's our introduction to storyboarding, and today we'll be covering who should be involved, when should it take place, how to develop a simple storyboard. So Tara and I are now going to role play a situation that, as instructional designers, we've encountered a few times. It tends to occur at the beginning of a project, but not necessarily. It stems from an enthusiasm for the subject matter that takes over from the basics of learning delivery. In this role play, I will play the subject matter expert, or SME, and Tara will be the instructional designer.
I think, sorry, Paddy, I'm going to take the role of SME on this, if you don't mind.
You prefer to be the SME? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have
you be the SME and I'll be the instructional designer.
Okay, I'll start. Please forgive my acting skills, and this is just, I might exaggerate slightly because this is just to demonstrate a point. Okay, here we go. Hi, Paddy. So have you had a chance to look over the PowerPoint I sent you? It's all the training material we have on health and safety in an airport.
I have, Tara. Thanks. It's very comprehensive.
Why, thank you. I wrote it myself.
That's great. So let's begin our storyboarding session and we'll see how we're going to chunk all the information.
Chunk? What does that mean?
Okay, so chunking basically means to break down the information into bite-sized pieces, which makes the learning more digestible.
Okay, you'll have to show me.
Oh, no problem. So let's start with the first text slide of your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a very informative slide, but perhaps a little too text heavy. I would recommend chunking this into no more than 3 pieces of information on screen. That way, we can avoid overloading the learner. This is why establishing a solid storyboard is so important.
Yeah, but like all of this information is very important. If it's not all there, people could die.
I completely understand. Okay, I completely understand the importance of this information. So what I propose is that we move some of it to a voiceover. That way, the learner will hear the information, but won't be intimidated by a text-heavy slide.
I don't see why it can't all be on slide. I mean, they should be able to read it.
Okay, so people learn by different methods. Some like audio, some like visuals, and others prefer to learn by doing, which is called kinesthetic learning. By delivering content in a variety of formats, we can cater to these different learning styles at the same time. We recommend keeping the most important points on screen and moving the rest to audio. We'll also reinforce the most important points in the audio script.
But how will they know what's important?
Well, that's what we're going to work together to achieve. We're going to distill this slide down to 3 or 4 essential pieces of information, and this will be the take-home message of the slide. The rest we will add to the voiceover.
Okay, I'm not really sure. I should probably get a few colleagues in here to go through this with us.
Yeah, that's fine. I want you to be sure you're happy with the content. Remember, we'll be revisiting the storyboard at least once, so nothing will be built until you're happy.
Okay, that's great.
So I would recommend that someone, probably yourself, be the main stakeholder of the project. It's great to involve colleagues, but sometimes too many opinions can delay or break the build. As the main stakeholder and expert, you should have the final say over what your colleagues would like to see in the module, and we can work together from there.
Okay, great. Let's get started then. Okay, so that was our little role play. I hope that it's illustrated how to get the ball rolling in a storyboarding session. It's so important that everyone is clear in their roles in order for your project to run smoothly. Ideally, you don't want too many people involved in the storyboard. The essentials are really the SME, subject matter expert, and the ID, the instructional designer. But often the project manager will be involved, or perhaps a second SME, but really that's the most amount of people you'd want involved. If you add more people to the session, they should have a clearly defined role in the storyboarding process, because as the saying goes, too many cooks will spoil the broth. So for example, if the role is as a reviewer, it might be better to have them review the storyboard after the session and suggest specific changes then. Otherwise, you can just take up a lot of time with different opinions, etc., and get very little work done. So each person should be clear on their role and what they're expected to bring to the table. The designer will be recommending ways of presenting the information to achieve the best outcome for the learner, and the SME will be bringing their expertise on the subject. So there's very, very little to be gained in either person encroaching on the other's role. It has to be a collaboration in order to develop the best module. So this should all take place at the very beginning of the project. Nothing should be built until you have a finalized and signed off storyboard. This may take a few iterations, but once you have sign off, you can then proceed with the build and you're safe in the knowledge that everyone's happy with it. The alternative means having to implement multiple changes to the module once it's been built, and that's costing you and your SME time and money.
So you heard us mention the term chunking in our role play and what it pertains to. So chunking is very important when delivering e-learning content because all too often the learner is faced with huge amounts of information on the slides. This does nothing to enhance the learning experience and in fact can have the opposite effect of disengaging the learner. So if you look at our examples on screen, you can see that we all use chunking in our everyday lives even if we don't realize it. It helps us retain information better and avoid cognitive overload. The example of phone numbers and credit cards illustrates the chunking of information, and we'll be applying this technique to our content going forward.
So let's start with the storyboard, now that we've spoken about it. We know what it is. So here is a template, and this is one that we use ourselves here at Enovation to keep track of how each slide in the module will look. So as you can see on the slide here, we have various pieces of information. We have our lesson title. We also include the branding guidelines for the client. There's things like the slide number or the slide title. That's very important when you're making edits that everybody knows which slide you're referring to. A list of interactions that may be on screen, a script if you decide to have a voiceover for your module. Then on the right-hand side, you can see there's the text and different animations and images that you may wish to include for that particular slide. And we would do one of these per slide for your module. Can you click on, Paddy?
Sure.
Thanks. So this slide here is what a real storyboard looks like. So this is the one that we're going to use today for our module. And as you can see, we have included learning objectives as part of our second slide. So this is standard best practice for most learning modules. It helps learners know what's expected of them and what they can hope to achieve by the end of the module. So based on this, we're going to build our first slides of our full module. And as you can see, we have our slide title and the text that we wish to include and the images for the slide in thumbnail form. You can see it there, the little airplane. And as this is what we'll be building today, we're going to go to our finished storyboard. And we're going to start at the beginning and open. So this is what we're going to be building today, which looks fab. And we are going to start from the very beginning and we're going to open up a new project in Storyline 360 or 3 if that's what you're using. And Paddy is going to now walk us through the build.
Okay, everybody, so I am going to start by opening up a new project in Storyline 360. And I'm just going to get my storyboard set up. Okay, and the very first slide that we're going to build is based on this storyboard here, and it's going to be a welcome slide. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Storyline and double click into our slide, and we're just going to double click into the title on the left here and rename it to welcome. And on the slide itself, the first thing we're going to do is go to the Insert menu. And under the Content Library, we're going to make a selection of photos. So the Content Library is a value add that comes with a Storyline 360 subscription. And it includes all kinds of stock content for your modules. Completely license free, included with the subscription. So there's characters, photos, illustrations, icons, and videos. For right now, we're going to select photos. And that brings up the built-in search engine in the content library built into the program. So for me today, I am going to search for runway airplane. And I'm going to select this image here because this looks closest to what I want to see in my welcome slide. So when I double click that, it's going to automatically download it and place it on the slide. You notice also that it places it on the timeline panel here at the bottom. Storyline is a timeline-based program, so every object that you add to slide will also appear on the timeline panel and also on the slide itself. So I noticed that the object or the image that gets placed on slide isn't exactly the resolution that I want for my slide. I can check the resolution on my build by going to Design and Story Size. And that tells me that my build is 720 by 540 pixels. So I need to make a modification to my image to make it fit. So I'll show you a few different ways of doing this as we build the next few slides. But the first way is just by dragging, very similarly to how you would in PowerPoint. So I'm going to drag the image and place it snapping to the top left, and you can see my smart guides on screen help me to do that. And then I'm going to drag the handle out from the bottom right. And again, using the smart guides, I'm just going to snap it to the screen. So now what you'll notice if I use the eyeball icon on the timeline to hide this image is that the image is slightly bigger than the canvas. So I'm just going to crop the image off to make it fit. So I'm going to click the eyeball icon again to unhide it. And what you'll notice is when you select content in Storyline, oftentimes you get a context-aware menu. And what that means is if you look just above the help button here, when I highlight the image, a context-aware image, or a context-aware ribbon, I should say, for image type comes up. So I'm then going to click on Format for that context-aware menu, and I'm going to click the Crop tool. And I'm going to drag the right handle in, and you can see in the background there, you can see the canvas size, and you can also see that Storyline tells me the exact image size that I'm cropping the image to. So I know that I want it to be 720 by 540, so I'll release there and just unclick the image. And that's fine, my background image is now cropped to the size I want it to be. So I'm now going to go back to my storyboard, and I'm going to start adding the text that I want to see on screen. So I'm going to start with the title, copy that, and in Storyline I'm going to go to Insert and select Text Box. And I just click on the side there and I get a text box. And I'm going to use Control-V on the keyboard to paste my text in there. And I think I'd like to see it a little bigger. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger, and I'm also going to change the color on that text to white. And I'm going to go back and get the next piece of text, which is our welcome sentence, and go back to Storyline. And another way of adding a new text box is on the keyboard with Control and T, and that will also add a text box. So I'm going to paste that content in. I'm just going to bring it off to the side here so I can see it a little bit better. And again, I'm going to change the color of that text to white. And I'm going to use the smart guides to align those two pieces of content. So the next thing I want to add is under the Insert ribbon again, and this time I'm going to add a shape. And I think I'm going to select this second last one. And I'm just going to drag that shape out to be roughly the size I want. But then I want to use the handle, again, very similar to PowerPoint, to rotate that shape to the side. Okay, and that's about the size I want, maybe a little longer. And that's about roughly where I want it. So what I'm going to do is place it beside or over my text here, just so I can see how it lines up. Oh, so what you'll see is that the box object that I've added appears over the two text objects. And the reason for that is, again, if you look down at the timeline panel, you can see that the object that I have currently selected, the box, is on top of the timeline. If I select the object below it, that's the sentence that I added just beforehand. And you can see it's there, I just can't view it. And again, the same with the title that I've added there. So to fix that, again, number of ways of doing anything. We can just select the box and drag it down on the timeline is the first way to fix that problem. Okay, so now that they are displaying correctly, I'm going to use my mouse and lasso all three objects. And with all three selected, I can grab the edge of the box and just move it on screen to be into the position that I want to see it in. Okay, so that looks good. I think the only thing I want to change is the color of that box. So again, when I select the box, I'll get a context-aware menu appearing up on top here. If I deselect it for a second, you can see that that menu goes away. And I can just click Format to activate that menu. So I think something a little lighter, like a light blue. And I might just give it a nudge up there using the up key on the keyboard while lassoing it all. Okay, so that's more or less where I want it to be. And the last thing I think I want to add into this slide is a placeholder for the company logo, because we're not going to be using a real company logo today. So for this, I'm going to go back to the content library and go to Insert. And this time I think I'm going to select Icons. And let's search for an airplane. Okay, that one will do fine. So I'm just going to select that icon and it brings it in on screen. Now with the icons, you can resize them, recolor them, do whatever you'd like to them. So in this case, I think I'm going to make it a purple. And I'm just going to place it up on top here, and again use the smart guide just to align to the middle of that box. And that's going to sit there in lieu of company logo. So that's our very first slide, just welcoming our learners to the module and giving the company branding. So now we're going to move on to our second slide, which is going to be a learning objective slide, and again hopefully catch the eye and keep learners engaged in the module. So to do that, I'm going to go over to the left hand side here, right click and go to New Slide. And from there, I'm going to go to Basic Layouts and select a blank slide. And that will add in the second slide to my storyline project. Okay, I'm going to return to my storyboard now and move down to the next slide. And so the first thing I'm going to do is copy the title for the slide and double click on the untitled slide there on the left hand margin. And just paste in my title for the slides. Just good practice to label your slides so that you know later on what slides are what and that they will show up correctly in your menu system in your published project. Okay, so going back to my storyboard for a second, I see that this is a learning objective slide and it calls for a background image of a plain runway. And I have some text that I'm going to pop in. Okay, so again, the first thing I think I'm going to add here is the background image. So I'm going to go back to the content library and go Insert, Photos, just like before. And again, I'm going to search for runway airplane. And I like the look of this image for now. Okay, and again, we see that the image isn't quite the right size for the canvas of the template we're going to use. So another way of fixing this, if you don't like using the crop tool, is to right click on the image and go to Size and Position. And you get this dialog here, and this helps you resize and position the tool, or the image I should say, sorry. So the first thing we'll do is go to Position, and I'll just position it at 0 and 0 and tab up, and that will move the image to the top of the slide. So now we'll come back to the size dialog and we'll start resizing the image. So I'm just going to go back to design and story size to check the dimensions of the template that we're working with. So it's 720 by 540, and so I'm going to change the height to 540. Okay, and we can see that that's changed the width to 810 pixels. And again, if I hide the image in Storyline, you can see that the image overlaps the canvas quite a bit. So our canvas size is 720, our image width is 810, so I know that we need to crop 90 pixels. And we can do that down here, and you can crop from the left, right, top, or bottom. In this case, we're going to crop 90 pixels from the right. And when I change focus, you can see that the image crops off there. And again, if we hide the image, you can now see it's the perfect size for the canvas. Okay, so I'm going to close that off. And I'm going to start adding my contents. So the first thing that we want is a title bar for learning objectives. So again, I'm going to go Control T on the keyboard and add a new text box. And I'm going to use Control V to paste in the text from my storyboard. And I'm going to use Control A to highlight it all and just come back to the home screen and change the coloring and size. And with the coloring and size changed, I'm just going to place it roughly where I want it on screen. And then I'm going to go to Insert and Shape. And this time I think I'll select this shape. And I'm going to drag that out roughly to be where I want it to be on screen. And we run into the same problem. The shape I've just added is above the text box on the timeline. So another way of solving that problem is with the shape selected, you can go to the Drawing Tools Context Aware menu, go to the Arrange tool, and click on Send Backwards. And that will move it down the timeline on the bottom. So if I were to click Arrange, Bring Forward, you'll see that it moves up the timeline. Okay, and one more time, I'll just send it backwards. Okay, so I think looking at it now, I want the text to be just a little bigger, so I'm just going to make it bigger one more time. And draw out the box a little bit. And then we'll go back into the Context Aware menu and change the color just to match a little better. And now I'm going to start adding the content for my actual learning objectives. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Insert, Shape, and this time I'm just going to select a rectangle. And I'm just going to draw that out. Now let me refer back to my storyboard, and I see that I've got 3 learning objectives. Okay, so I am going to select the object I just drew and click Control C on the keyboard, Control V, and Control V one more time, just so I get 2 more copies. So I'm going to select the topmost copy, and using the smart guides, I am just going to drag it down to the bottom roughly to where I want it to be. And I'm going to use the lasso tool to select all 3. And now I can use the Context Aware menu one more time and use the Align tools to place these all in alignment. So the first thing I probably want to do is distribute vertically and then align to the left. And now I know that they're all evenly spaced out on the slide. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is start adding text for my learning objectives. So I'll go to Insert, Text Box, and type in my numbering for my first learning objective and just make it a little bigger. Okay, and I'll drag that up to roughly where I want it to be. And I can do the same thing again. I can just copy and paste twice. And then use the smart guidelines to align them. And just place those on screen roughly where I want them to be. And then I can click in here and just change the numbering. Okay, so now we finally want to start adding the text for the learning objectives themselves. Okay, so I can copy the first one, come back to the slide and just go Insert Text Box and paste in that first learning objective. And I'm just going to remove that one and bring the box in a little bit. And I can see some formatting has come through from the storyboard, so I'm going to use Control A on the keyboard to select all the text in that box. I'm going to right click and just go to the paragraph. Okay, and inside the paragraph I'm just going to remove the indentation from the pre-existing formatting. And I'm also going to change the color to white. And now place it on screen. And I just might nudge that up a little bit. Okay, then with that done, I'm going to copy this box and use the smart guides to transfer it down. And I'm going to nudge that up a little bit also. And let's bring in the text for our second learning objective. So I'm going to copy that across and I'll use the paste to keep text only option. And that will keep some of my formatting. Okay, so I'm going to remove the numbering that came across with that and then just do the same for the last. Oops, I need to copy this box first. And again, just use the smart guides to align. And just use that same paste option to bring across the text for the last object. Now, so I think the last thing I want to do is maybe change the coloring on these boxes just to match the color scheme for the learning objectives box that we're using. I just want to use, maybe this one here is a good one. Okay. And maybe the last thing I'll do is lasso that box and just align it to the middle of this third objective box. Okay, so the final thing that I want to do on the screen is you'll notice sometimes when you're working with multiple smaller objects on screen and you have a background image like this, the background image can get in the way where you're trying to select something and you just get the image instead. If I'm trying to select this box, sometimes I just accidentally select the image. So a good practice for that is to come down to the timeline here, and in the same way you can hide the objects, you can also lock or unlock them. So once I've locked or run my photo, I can't select it. Even if I select everything on screen with Control A, I still don't select that. So it makes moving objects around a little easier. So we have our welcome screen and we have our learning objective screen. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, as a little value add, we're going to add a summary screen, which is made up of more or less the same content as the learning objective screen. So you would use this just to reinforce the knowledge of the key points of your module right at the end, the points that you want to emphasize at the very start and at the end in a bookending process. So to do that, I'm going to right click on the learning objective screen and use the duplicate option. And that's going to give me a duplicate of that screen that I'm going to double click into and click summary as a title. So now we have a duplicate of it there, and we maybe don't want it to look exactly the same. So maybe the first thing we want to do is just change up the color scheme on the boxes, just to make it look a little different. So I can select all three of these, and yeah, maybe we'll use the purple color scheme for this. And the other change that we could make, I think, easily is to just change the background image. So it contains more or less the same information, but with a different image, different color scheme, and of course we want to change learning objectives in here to summary. Okay, and I'm going to go into the content library one more time and go insert photo. And let's see, this one here might be a good one to use. Okay, so we again end up with the same issue where the image just needs to be resized. So we'll just run through that quickly because we've seen it twice now. Okay, so I'm just going to resize it there, and I'll use the cropping tool just to drag into the exact size of the canvas. Okay, and then I'm going to right click the image itself and go send to back. Now, of course, you'll notice from what we mentioned earlier that that image has now gone to the very bottom of the timeline, and that the image we were using previously is covering it up. So if I just click to unhide, there's the image that we want to see on this slide. So I'm just going to click the image here, which of course I can't do because I've locked it. So I'll unlock it there, select that image and just delete. So now we have our welcome slide, our learning objective slide, and our summary slide, all built in very little time, making use of the content library within Articulate Storyline. So the last thing you want to do, as you always want to do with any program, is to save as. And we're going to do that and we're also going to version our content. And I'm just going to click save on that. And that's our build complete for today. So Tara, I'll turn back over to you.
That's fantastic, Paddy. Would you mind just previewing that so we can have a look at it in full screen? So everyone can have
of course. So in Storyline, you can preview your work before you're ready to publish it for the web. So I'm just going to preview the entire project just to see what this looks like in the browser. and this is our first slide in a desktop browser. And we can also preview this for a tablet or for a mobile device. Why don't we use tablet for today? It's an attractive player. Okay, so there's our first slide, our welcome slide with logo, branding, and welcome to the course and background image. Then we click next and we get our learning objectives screen with our learning objectives for our project, and again a nice eye-catching background image. And if I click next again, I have the duplicate of that screen as a summary screen to bookend our entire project. So that's
great. Thanks a million, Paddy.
In the preview. Thanks, Tara.
It looks really, really good. That was a great demo. Okay, well, we are going to have a quick recap just to go over what we've seen. So we've seen today in our webinar the importance of storyboarding and defining the stakeholders' roles from the get-go. We also looked at some instructional design best practice using ADDIE, the chunking of information, the inclusion of learning objectives, and also to bookend your learning with them at the end of your module. We also saw how to go from your storyboard to actually building it in Storyline 360, and that included adding images from the Articulate Storyline content library, adding text, the adding and editing of shapes, and we had a glance at the timeline. Now, over the next few webinars, we will be going much more into the use of the timeline and how that can really make your slides interactive, different timings, etc. But that'll be for another webinar. That may be the end of our presentation, but we do have some time now for any questions that you might have on what you've just seen, or even innovation or anything like that. So if you have any questions at all, just type them there into the question box, and we'll be able to answer them straight away for you. Unless, of course, you know, we left no stone unturned and you have no questions at all.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Tara said, guys, we will be building on this knowledge in the next series of webinars to include interactivity, timings, quizzing, result slides, all the things that you're going to want to see in your basics first storyline module. So I hope you found it useful, and please do let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, so there has been a question regarding getting the content post webinar. We have recorded all of this, and we will be sending out a link to the video of this webinar so you'll be able to access it, etc. What we plan on doing is that we are going to add all of the webinars, and that way you can view them again at your own pace, but there will also be a quiz and a certificate at the end. So we're kind of applying our own best practice ideas to our own learning here. We have to practice what we preach. So once we have that all up and running, you'll all be receiving the link so you can access it whenever you like. There's another question here from Aileen. What's the advantage over PowerPoint? It's very similar, but seems to be slower to build the slides. Do you want to answer that, Paddy?
Yeah, sure. So there are 4 real advantages that really give Storyline its power over a tool like PowerPoint. I'll do a quick jump back into Storyline here, just while I explain them. So the first one we kind of touched on, which is the timeline, which allows you to control timing of when objects appear on your slide. And with that, then there's also animations built in so that you can make your slides more visually interesting to your learners. The second panel here, the second thing that I think gives Storyline its power, is slide layers. Slide layers function very similar to the old overhead projectors we all remember in school, whereby you would layer transparent layers of plastic on top of one another. So you can use that to break learners off into different areas of slides. You can use that to provide feedback, or you can use it to make your objects on slide more dynamic if you want to click them and have something happen. So a slide layer is like a destination for your slide. The third thing is triggers, and that's this panel up here. And triggers are really how we make things happen. So if you want to send your learner to another layer, or if you want to send your learner to another slide, or if you want to develop really complex logic-based rules for what should happen when an event happens, then that's where you make them go. And you can kind of see very simple triggers built in here. If I double click this one, you'll see that they're built just using a wizard. And so when an event happens, then what you want the program to do. So in this case, it's just to let the program know that it should move on to the next slide when you click the next button, and that's automatically built into every slide that we add. And the fourth thing that I think that gives Storyline its power is the states tool, and that's located down here. So most every object that you add to a Storyline slide can be given a state, and a state is kind of like a state on a button on a website. So like a hover state, or like a selected state, or like a visited state. And that is kind of like a layer for an individual object. So it allows you to add more character, more complexity, and more dexterity onto your individual objects. That'll become clearer, Aileen, in the upcoming webinars as we go through them and as we demonstrate some of the other features that Storyline has to offer.
Thanks, Paddy. Lorraine says, great presentation. Thank you very much. Love the role play. Very like some SMEs I've experienced in the past. Yes, I think we can all relate to the, the role play. Simon asks, can the instructional designer and content developer be the same person? They actually can, Simon, depending, I suppose, on resourcing and etc. There can be an overlap between the two, and if you have an instructional designer that's skilled in content development, then they're really, I mean, then actually, you know, they would be, I suppose, nearly best placed to do both roles, but obviously you'd have to have the skills to be able to do both comfortably.
Just to add on to that, Tara, I would say they're very complementary but distinct skill sets. So the content developer is obviously the person who has the ability to build the module in Storyline. The instructional designer relates more to how to structure the storyboard and how to structure information through chunking and other methods. And oftentimes that can be overlooked, but yeah, they are very complementary skill sets. So frequently we'll see them be the same person.
What format, this is from Linda, thank you, Linda. What format did you save the file as? Any recommendations on this?
Okay, yeah, so I'll again jump into Storyline and just go to File Save As to show you this. So it saves as a .story file, Linda, which is a proprietary Storyline file type. You can also, if you want to export your file, if it's a great file that you want to share with your team or the larger Storyline community, you can export it as a Storyline template, and other members of your team or the community can then import it into their projects. But typically when you're building a piece of content, it will be stored as a .story. And that file will be as big or small as the elements you have in there. So if you add a lot of audio or video to that, it can get quite large. You can see that the one that I've built here is 1.7 meg. So by default, with a couple of images and text, it's not so big.
Okay, next, Alexandra was asking, is the table of contents toolbar bit on the left-hand side automatically generated once you publish? It is, Alexandra. Could you open up the player there, Paddy?
Yeah, sure.
It can be removed as well, and it doesn't have to appear, but you can also change the colors, the font, things like that. So it is editable, but as a default, it will appear on the left-hand side.
And we can also go further with it. We can add branding to the menu. I mean, typically you don't need to, because it will either be on screen or on your LMS. But if you want to see branding on the menu part, we can do that, and we can colorize it to match the content that you're going to display. You'll notice that it's a dynamic player as well. So if you go to a more mobile device or a tablet, you'll notice that the player automatically resizes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone. You have a button here which will show you the menu and the resources as well. And then on a mobile device, it's still present. It's just a little less intrusive. So it dynamically resizes the player based on the device that you're viewing the content on.
Next we have Paul, who's asking, what about the speaker view and narrative hidden from the students? Is that feature available in the application? Next slide view also. I think you're probably thinking
Paul asking
of
about speaker notes, maybe similar to PowerPoint.
Maybe is that what, Paul? If you're still here, Paul, could you maybe add another detail to that? We're just wondering if you're talking about speaker notes, which absolutely can be included on it. But next slide view is because this is seen as a more of a one-to-one e-learning between students and the module itself. It wouldn't necessarily be seen as a tool for presenting with. That would be more so the PowerPoint side of things. Christine asks, do you use or have you used Adobe Captivate? Have you found Storyline in comparison? I've used Adobe Captivate a bit, not massively. I find Storyline myself to be a better tool. I find it more powerful. You're able to do more with it, and it's also more intuitive. I'm coming from a background, I'm not like Paddy, who has lots of experience in the field. I'm coming from a teaching background, and for me, I found it far easier to adapt to Storyline and how to use it. It was much easier to get up and running with it faster than with Adobe Captivate. But I don't know, Paddy, if you have any opinions on Captivate.
Yeah, I think the only things I would add to that is if you're used to Adobe tools, Captivate fits into that ecosystem very well. So it will function very similarly to other Adobe tools. Adobe tools like Photoshop and Illustrator and such. A lot of the same shortcuts will follow on as well. The other thing that's different between Storyline and Captivate is that Captivate for every slide allows you to build different layouts for different devices, so for mobile or tablet devices, whereas as you've seen with Storyline, Articulate's approach to this is to actually dynamically change the player, but that the content developer doesn't need to build multiple layouts for the same slide. You'll see the same layout regardless of device, and the player would adapt to fit the device better.
Great. So thank you, Francesco, sorry. How do you deliver and track the content with learners? From Simon. Do you want to answer that, Paddy?
Yeah, sure. So some of the output objects, when you actually go to publish your project at the end, you can publish for a variety of outputs. One of the ones that enables tracking is you can publish for LMS, and you can publish to SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004, AICC, or Tin Can API. And you can then set up tracking based on either progression through the module, so number of slides, or you can track based on a quiz and a score in that quiz. So it depends on what your goals are and what your content is for the project that you're building as to how you would track that best, Paul.
Great. Thank you, Denise. So I think you've just answered actually Cahill's question there, which was, can it be exported in SCORM only, or can you do it via Tin Can? So you can see there on screen at the moment, you can easily export via Tin Can. And great. Simon wants to know when the next session is. The next session is the 11th of April, am I right? Am I wrong? It's the 11th of April, so 2 weeks from today, same time.
Let's
same
just
computer screen.
Confirm that. Yeah, the 11th of April at 11 a.m. is the next session.
Does anybody else have any more questions at all? We have literally a minute. Okay, well, if that's everything, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We hope that you enjoyed it and got a bit of learning out of it, and that we'll see you at our next webinar on the 11th.
Thanks very much, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Bye.